What if one of the biggest secrets in American history isn't about presidents, wars, or industry, but about a hidden trade that quietly built old money dynasties? Imagine this. Long before any modern underground networks existed, some of the most respected families in America, names carved into universities, hospitals, and museums, were building fortunes through a global business that preyed on human weakness. Not criminals, not fugitives, but the founders of New England high society. Families like the Perkins, the Forbes, and even the ancestors of a future president were shaping America's elite class using profits from a product that the Chinese government had already outlawed. A product so powerful, so in demand, that it created a massive shadow economy stretching from Boston to the South China Sea. For 2 centuries, these families polished their reputation until the truth vanished into archives and shipping logs almost no one reads anymore. Today, we're pulling that truth back into the light. This is the buried story of how some of America's earliest fortunes were built, not on invention, but on a forbidden trade halfway across the world. Before we uncover the hidden engine behind these fortunes, you need to understand who these families were. Not just wealthy merchants, not just influential names on marble plaques. These were the Boston Brahmins, the self-appointed upper class of early America. Picture Beacon Hill in the early 1800s. Quiet brick streets, gas lamps glowing, and families whose last names carried more weight than most people's entire savings. Cabot, Lowell, Coolidge, Perkins, Forbes, Delano. These weren't just citizens. They were the blueprint for the American elite. They lived in the grandest houses, controlled the best social clubs, married within their circle, and sent generation after generation to Harvard. They funded orchestras, libraries, and charitable foundations that still exist today. And they carried themselves with an almost missionary belief that they were born to lead the country toward a higher moral purpose. That polished image, the elegance, the philanthropy, the sermons about discipline and character, that's the version history books love to repeat. It's clean, it's flattering, and it's incomplete, because behind those perfectly maintained facades, behind the charity banquets and moral speeches, there was another story, a quiet source of wealth that never made it into the family memoirs, a trade that powered their rise, shaped Boston's institutions, and quietly bankrolled the era that would become America's age of expansion. A story so uncomfortable that for generations, it was intentionally omitted or softened until it faded from public memory. To understand the truth behind these dynasties, you need to see past the marble statues and ivy-covered walls. The Boston Brahmins weren't just building a society, they were building a shield. A reputation so pristine that no one ever questioned where the earliest money actually came from. And once you see that shield for what it really is, the rest of this story becomes impossible to forget. So how did these polished philanthropic families end up tied to a trade they would spend generations trying to erase? To understand that, you have to look at one of the biggest business dilemmas of the 18th and 19th centuries, the China trade. At the time, China was the marketplace the entire Western world envied. Silk, porcelain, and especially tea. Every ship captain dreamed of bringing these treasures home. The demand was bottomless, but there was a catch, a massive one. China didn't want anything from the West. To the Qing dynasty, Western goods were low-value trinkets. So foreign merchants had only one option: pay in silver and pay heavily. Within a few decades, the West was bleeding silver at an unsustainable rate. Wealth was flowing one way, and it wasn't toward Boston. American merchants, including the Boston elite, were stuck. They needed something China wanted, something so valuable that it would flip the flow of silver, and eventually they found it. A product grown in foreign territories, handled by middlemen, and in sky-high demand among certain circles in China, a product the government there had already outlawed because of its social impact. Yet it was still widely sought after, traded quietly through offshore hubs and secret coastal routes. British companies had already industrialized this system through their colonies. American merchants saw the model, studied it, and realized they could carve out their own lane by sourcing the product elsewhere. This is where families like the Perkins stepped in. They created an entirely new pipeline, ships sailing from Boston to the Mediterranean, acquiring high-value goods, then transporting them across half the world to discrete islands off the coast of China. From there, local intermediaries handled distribution inland, often with the help of officials who were willing to look the other way for the right price. Was it risky? Absolutely. The Chinese government had banned the product and enforcement was intensifying. But for the Boston merchants, the risks were just another cost of doing business. And the payoff? Beyond anything America had seen. By the late 1820s, firms like Russell and Company, heavily backed by Boston families, were moving thousands of chests a year. The revenue was staggering, enough to catapult young men into fortunes normally reserved for royalty. This wasn't small-time trading. This was a global network, a shadow economy powering the rise of some of America's most respected dynasties. And once the money started flowing, it didn't just change Boston, it changed the entire country. Because these fortunes weren't spent on luxury, they were reinvested into the industries that would shape the American future. What happened in the China trade wasn't the work of a few adventurous merchants. It was a coordinated network of elite American families, all drawing wealth from the same hidden system. And three names sat at the center of it: Perkins, Forbes, and Delano. These weren't background players. They were the architects. The Perkins syndicate, the godfather of the trade. If there's a ground zero for America's involvement in this shadow trade, it begins with one man, Thomas Handicid Perkins. Born in 1764, Perkins wasn't just ambitious, he was relentless. Early in his career, he built wealth by trading in whatever markets promised returns, no matter how unstable. But once he discovered the profits flowing through the China trade, everything changed. Perkins saw opportunity where others saw risk. While British companies relied on products sourced from their colonies, Perkins created an entirely separate supply chain. He sent ships to the Mediterranean, acquired high-value goods, and funneled them directly into the China coastline through offshore hubs. He perfected the logistics. Boston to Turkey, Turkey to the China coast, China back to Boston with ships full of tea and luxury goods, paid for by his overseas operations. By the early 1800s, Perkins & Coers was a financial force. Young merchants trained under him the same way protégés learn under a modern titan of industry. He didn't just make money, he established a new class of American wealth. This was the foundation of New England's old money, a fortune built quietly overseas, then showcased loudly at home. The Forbes expansion, from opium to railroads. Among the young men shaped by Perkins' empire were members of the Forbes family, and none were more influential than John Murray Forbes. John Murray was sent to China as a teenager, and he rose fast, faster than almost anyone in his generation. Working within Russell and Company, the firm that absorbed the Perkins operation, he helped turn it into the largest American presence in China. His brother, Robert Forbes, managed the offshore depots and coordinated with local intermediaries. John built alliances, most importantly with Haokua, the wealthiest Chinese merchant of the era. This partnership gave the Americans leverage, stability, and access no Western trader could dream of obtaining alone. But John Murray Forbes didn't stop there. After securing his overseas fortune, he came home and made a move that reshaped the United States. He reinvested everything into railroads: Michigan Central, Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, the lines that opened the American West, the steel routes that carried coal, wheat, immigrants, and expansion across the frontier. A significant portion of that infrastructure was funded by wealth earned in the China trade. Forbes became a national power broker, an abolitionist, a political strategist, and one of the financial forces behind Abraham Lincoln's rise. His story is a study in contradictions. A man whose fortune came from one troubled trade overseas, but who helped fight one of the greatest moral battles at home. The Delano dynasty, from Macau to the White House. Then there's the most surprising family of all, the Delanos. Before they became political royalty, they were major players in the China trade. The key figure was Warren Delano Jr., the grandfather of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Delano arrived in China in 1833. He was young, driven, and quick to learn. Within a decade, he became a leading partner at Russell and Company, overseeing some of the firm's most sensitive overseas operations. He was there during the first Opium War, one of the most turbulent periods in the entire trade network. Delano and his partners navigated every political shift, every tightening of enforcement, every moment of uncertainty. They adapted. They negotiated. They leveraged every connection they had. His fortune skyrocketed. He eventually lost much of it in the U.S. financial crash of 1857, but instead of starting over at home, he went straight back to China and rebuilt it. The family estate where FDR grew up, Algonac, was funded by this second fortune. The legacy of that wealth didn't just shape Boston, it shaped the White House. When these families returned home with fortunes made through their overseas ventures, they couldn't simply drop that wealth into Boston society as it was. Not because anyone would arrest them, many Western governments looked the other way at the time, but because the origin of the money clashed violently with the moral image these families had spent decades polishing. So they did what influential families have always done when faced with uncomfortable origins. They rebranded it, completely, strategically, brilliantly. Thomas Honda Perkins, the same man whose international trade routes helped launch an entire fortune, became one of Boston's greatest philanthropists. He donated his mansion to fund a school for the blind. He helped establish the Massachusetts General Hospital. He endowed cultural institutions that still define the city today. Walk through Boston and you'll see his name everywhere, on plaques, in libraries, in old directories filled with praise. But the specific trade that powered his rise, neatly omitted, softened, buried under generosity. And Perkins wasn't alone. The same pattern runs through New England's most respected institutions. Endowments poured into Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Princeton. Money built lecture halls, libraries, laboratories, and scholarships. Historic buildings still standing today were constructed with wealth earned from global ventures that textbooks politely describe as the China trade, even though the most profitable part of that trade was the one never discussed. It wasn't philanthropy, it was transformation. A deliberate conversion of controversial fortunes into moral authority. The families understood something powerful. If you invest in hospitals, museums, and universities, you don't just buy good press, you shape how future generations are taught to remember you. And it worked. Over time, public memory hardened like wet cement. The narrative became simple. These were the founders of American high society, pillars of virtue, patrons of culture, builders of institutions. What was left out was the engine that made it all possible. By the time the 20th century arrived, the early chapters of these fortunes had been blurred into sanitized footnotes. The global network that funded the rise of old money New England became a quiet rumor, a whisper you only found buried in shipping manifests and dusty archives. The transformation was complete. The reputations were spotless, and the wealth had been fully absorbed into America's most powerful families and institutions. A fortune earned overseas had been polished into a legacy at home, a legacy so clean, so carefully maintained, that almost no one questioned its origins. Here's where the story turns from shocking to almost unbelievable. After building their early fortunes through a global trade that China had already outlawed, many of these same American families reinvented themselves as champions of public morality. Yes, morality. By the mid-19th century, New England was swept up in the temperance movement, a massive campaign urging citizens to avoid alcohol and warning about the dangers of intoxicating habits. And at the front of these rallies, leading speeches, major donations, the very same Brahmin families whose fortunes had quietly flowed through a forbidden overseas product. They lectured working-class Americans about discipline. They condemned taverns. They wrote essays about moral decay, all while their own estates, foundations, and social influence rested on a trade that had impacted millions of people across the world. That's not irony, that's strategy. As the US government eventually began passing its first controls on stronger substances near the end of the 19th century, something else happened too. Public messaging shifted. The substances once handled by elite traders were now portrayed as threats associated with marginalized immigrant communities. The narrative flipped completely. The early American merchants became visionaries of international commerce. The uncomfortable origins of their wealth disappeared into carefully written histories, and the social problems tied to the very product that once fueled old money dynasties were now blamed on the very communities that had been harmed by it. It was the final act of a long, deliberate cover-up. A three-step cycle: build a fortune overseas through a banned product, use philanthropy to cleanse the reputation and solidify elite status, rewrite the narrative so thoroughly that the blame shifts onto others. By the time the 20th century rolled in, the transformation was complete. The families were remembered as moral leaders, builders of hospitals, libraries, and universities. The original engine behind their power wasn't just hidden, it was replaced with a new, cleaner story. And for over 150 years, most Americans never questioned it. The story of America's first narcos is more than just a shocking piece of forgotten history. It's a story about the very DNA of American wealth and power. It forces us to ask some pretty uncomfortable questions. The pristine campuses of the Ivy League, the respected halls of Boston's hospitals, the very railroads that stitch the country together, all of them carry the faint, sweet scent of opium. The fortunes of the Perkins, Forbes, and Delano families have since been diversified, legitimized, and passed down. The raw origin of that wealth, smuggling, addiction, exploitation, has been polished into the respectable sheen of old money. But the playbook they wrote is still in use. A system where elite networks can generate immense profits from morally bankrupt ventures, and then use that wealth to build a public legacy that shields them from accountability. This isn't just about the past, it's an echo that rings loud and clear today. From the Sackler family laundering their reputation through art donations while fueling the modern opioid crisis, to other industries that privatize massive profits while socializing the immense harm they cause, the pattern is disturbingly familiar. It's the same blueprint, drawn up 200 years ago in the counting houses of Boston and on the opium clippers in the South China Sea. The American dream was sold as a story of hard work and innovation. But this hidden chapter reveals a darker truth. It shows that for some of America's most foundational families, the dream was built on something else entirely. So the next time you hear those famous names, Forbes, Roosevelt, Lowell, Cabot, it's worth remembering the first product they so successfully sold to the world and asking yourself, what was the real price of the American dream and who really paid for it?